Hey everyone, so unfortunately the original range extender idea which I had for the van has failed because the engine just kept blowing head gaskets, and despite my best attempts to repair it and sort out the engine block, it's just not worked. I think that time where it was run at quite high power with the really hot exhaust right next to the engine as it was originally designed has weakened the block and just ruined it. So I went and picked this up today, and this is a Hyundai inverter generator, and I believe they're a Korean company, but there's actually nothing Korean about this. This is a Chinese unit, but I would still trust it over German engineering anyway, nevertheless. So the way this thing works is actually really clever. It's not got a starter motor on it. The actual high voltage generator, which is in here, it acts as the starter motor. So that's the module which converts the three-phase high voltage alternating current into single phase alternating current, and I've disconnected this totally. This also drives the stepper motor for the throttle, so I need to figure out a way to control that or use my own servo. This here is pretty interesting. This is a 12 volt to probably 400 volt three-phase inverter, which acts as a starter motor. This is actually allows the generator to act as a motor. So this takes a 12 volt DC and outputs three-phase alternating current for a few seconds just to allow the engine to start, and the engine will still start up and run even with this disconnected. So all I'm really going to need to do is possibly find out how the signals on this little card here are working, because I think that's a remote receiver card. I think you can see some sort of antenna arrangement on the top of it there. If I can find out what signal that's giving out, if it's just a simple on-off signal, I can just wire that into my controller, so I would just send a signal to start the engine. And there's a little 12 volt battery there, so it's quite interesting how that worked. I thought this thing would just have a 12 volt starter motor, but no, they're actually going to all the bother to use the generator as a starter motor. So it's got no fuel in it at all. I've taken all that off because I'm going to run it on LPG as much as possible. The only time I'd run it on petrol is maybe if I'm going on a very long trip somewhere. But from the studying that I've done, in general, it seems that LPG is actually better for engines. It may speed up valve recession, I don't know, but the general consensus seems to be that it burns cleaner, the oil lasts longer, and that there's less carbon build up as well. And well, I mean, I've smelt petrol engine exhaust when there's no catalytic converter on it, and it's just absolutely horrible. If this is run on petrol, it smells horrible, but when I run engines on LPG, you usually cannot smell the exhaust very much at all. So I'll give a little demonstration of the starting system working. So this is remote control for it. If I just press this, so yeah, if I press and hold the button, all it's just going to do is start up in 1 second bursts. And I would imagine once the engine's running, that control module will also charge this little battery here. It appears that's the only connection it has to the battery is through that module, so that would also handle charging this battery. So to get this working in the van, I have an unpopulated PCB of the upgraded generator controller here. This is going to have a very hefty bridge rectifier underneath it. I think it can handle 90 amps. And it'll have a fuse and everything on it, and as you can see, it's all isolated, and it's going to go in a nice neat box. And I've still to wait for the components to arrive. So there are like high current auxiliary outputs on this thing. which are here, which can drive things like, I don't know, fuel pumps, solenoids, servos, or I don't know, whatever that would just run on 12 volts at like maybe 10 amps. And it's got its own power supply for running servos and stuff. As for running, this cannot run stepper motors currently. I'd probably have to connect up a stepper driver to the to like spare outputs, which I have here. And as you can see, it's just going to be wires soldered onto the board rather than the board being massive, because I have to try and route everything to connectors around the edge. I think that's how I'm going to design stuff from now on, really. Wires are soldered onto boards, and then you can remove the connectors from inside whatever enclosure this is in. So it's just all one thing. So I should mount in the van quite nicely. I'm adding in extra ventilation in the van, so this is a lot less likely to overheat. There is a temperature sensor on the cylinder head as well, and I'm very much hoping that it goes to this little control module, which it indeed does. So this will probably protect the engine from overheating. It will just cut it off, and hopefully it's got a low oil sensor as well, which I imagine it does too. So yeah, sadly this thing wasn't cheap, but it's going to be quieter. And all I really need to do is for the exhaust, if you imagine in the back of my van, well, the original hole for the exhaust would be sitting roughly there. So provided this thing doesn't jump around too much, it'll just be possible for me to weld a solid pipe which just drops down through. So this should work okay. It's really quite clever how this is designed. There's even a fan there which blows around the exhaust to prevent the heat from the exhaust damaging things. So ideally I'd have a way to take outside air in, but I'm just going to have to settle for really strong ventilation inside. These are the two stepper motors for controlling the choke and the main throttle. And the main issue I have with these is there's no position feedback on them, so there's not really any way to just get them to go to a position unless I somehow add a feedback mechanism, which is probably going to be a lot of hassle. So I could just keep the choke control motor there because that's connected up to the starting inverter, and this one I might just be able to remove it and somehow get an RC servo in there, just a normal toy plane servo or whatever, toy car, something like that, which I was using on the original engine. But yeah, I'm fairly certain that the engine in here is just modified GX200, which has just been copied and copied so much amongst Chinese manufacturers. Like, you look at the valve cover, it's just exactly the same, apart from it's just this really sort of fancy aluminium deal. And the LPG carburetor would probably fit on this absolutely no problem at all. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. And then I'll just put this unit, the regulator, just somewhere else. It's all pretty much identical, I think. Further things to mention are the air filter box. So I could probably just, it does actually have a hole in the bottom for the air to get in, a long slot. If I just cover that up, I could maybe just make a cold air feed from outside for that, which should work really well. But if I am going to run it on petrol, it'll be from a separate tank, which is sort of sealed in some way, maybe with a vapor pipe which goes there. I don't know. I prefer to stay away from petrol because it's smelly, and if it leaks anywhere, it just gets on everything and it's just horrible. So I tend to stay away from it as much as I can. And obviously, like with petrol tanks, they release vapor all the time, and it's yet another safety hazard. Whereas LPG, it's pretty easy to shut off, and if it leaks, you certainly know about it because you can smell it, and it disperses pretty quickly as well in a well ventilated place.